the disability community, I think so often people were told no because they had a physical difference or they had an injury that led them to having a disability, and they're oftentimes told other people are telling them what they're capable of. And so I think that by growing up being physically different than my peers, I just always wanted to be better than them and prove that I could be. And so I just want to be the best at everything. So
Welcome to For the Long Run, the podcast exploring the why behind what keeps runners running long, strong, and motivated. I'm your host, Jonathan Levitt. Through personal and professional connections in the running world, I have the privilege of getting to know some amazing athletes. I've always been fascinated by the psychological aspects of running and what helps people to achieve success, however they define it, and this podcast is aimed at exploring this and much more. I hope you enjoy. For most of us runners, we are constantly fitting our training into a very busy schedule. Between work, families, and other responsibilities, this means a lot of running happens in the dark. And that's the one thing I love about runners, that this doesn't dissuade them, it motivates them. They see darkness as an opportunity for growth rather than an obstacle. That's why we're excited that this episode is sponsored by Petzl. Whether you're a get up before the kids and get your run in, or a trail runner with big mountain goals, you need a headlamp that keeps your path light and bright. We all know that tripping over stuff sucks, and we should do everything we can to avoid that. I've been using Petzl headlamps for years, and they've kept my trail lit up for long days out there, and nights. And just like how we feel about the sign of a good running shoe, a great headlamp is one that you completely forget that you're wearing. If you're in the market for a new headlamp, we highly recommend Petzl. I personally use the Now RL, and it's so bright for every occasion. Pick yours up at the local gear shop or over at petzl.com. And remember, when you support our brand partners, you support the For the Long Run podcast and team. We are proud to share that this episode is sponsored by our friends over at Puma. Here at For the Long Run podcast, we're fans of Puma and have been really impressed with their efforts to support and foster the running community. We're excited to partner with a brand that has such a rich history in sports and that cares deeply about the running community. Puma believes that sometimes all it takes is a spark to make a change, to get motivated, or to try something new or hard. And we couldn't agree more. All we need is that small spark, and the actions will follow to get us there. With that small flicker, anything is possible. Puma running shoes offers supreme cushioning, superior propulsion, comfort, and lightweight technology. I've been running in the DV8 Nitro First Mile, and I love how it has a focus on sustainability. The shoe feels amazing, and even better, it's in collaboration with First Mile. It's made from at least 20% recycled material, as First Mile's focus is on cutting down plastic waste in production and in the supply chain by finding innovative ways to get recycled plastic into products like Puma running shoes. Check out a pair for yourself at puma.com and use the code FORTHELONGRUN for 20% off any Puma Run or Train products. When you support Puma, you support me and the rest of the For the Long Run podcast team. Thanks again to Puma for sponsoring us. We are psyched to announce a new partner of the podcast, Lauren Daniels. Lauren is a realtor helping buyers and sellers in the greater Denver and Boulder area and beyond, and has been a good friend of mine for a few years now. When I decided I wanted to buy a place in Boulder and put down roots here, I was completely overwhelmed by the home buying process. Lauren was already a good friend, so when we first talked about home buying, I felt a huge sense of relief. She's a neighborhood expert, has an incredible attention to detail, available for any and all questions, and made what could be a very difficult process super easy. And now we've got a beautiful home in Boulder. It's close to the trails with a big backyard for Alfie and views of the Flatirons. So if you're even considering buying a home in the area or anywhere, I highly recommend working with Lauren. You can reach her at ldaniels@milehighmodern.com and let her know we sent you. That's ldaniels@milehighmodern.com. Thanks so much to Lauren for supporting the podcast and helping us continue to grow, and for all those miles together. All right, well, we're rolling. So we're live here in Boulder, Colorado with Dani Aravich. We are doing the first, I wish we could have someone do a video of the video.
A video of the video.
But we're live here in the first studio recording of For the Long Run podcast with Dani.
Oh my gosh, I'm honored that I get to be the first
Lights,
in the
camera,
studio.
action.
I know. And again, it's so professional, your setup. So much better than Zoom. And hopefully the audio too, because it's whenever you film a podcast or record a podcast on Zoom, I feel like then it's not as ideal to listen to when someone, you can tell the like computer glitchiness of it.
Thank you for saying that, because yesterday I was thinking about how I wanted to say something about thank you to everyone who has listened to the last 200 episodes and bear with me on the
on the Zoom recordings.
On the Zoom recordings, because the number of different mics I use, the number of like people in a coffee shop recording or like a cat meowing in the background. I'm like, all right, we're back. First 50 episodes of this podcast, we're done via sit down conversations in Tahoe, in Boulder, in mostly Tahoe and Boulder actually, but we're back. Anyway, this podcast is not about the podcast. It's about you. So the first question is always a tough one. Who is Dani?
I don't know. I feel like I could take this so many ways, because I think one thing that I appreciate about myself is I do so many things. Dani is former Division I cross-country and track and field runner. Dani was born missing her hand. Dani now competes on the U.S. Paralympic cross-country ski team. Dani is an advocate for women in sports, for people with disabilities, trying to change, the outdoor industry to be more inclusive. Dani is probably too busy and adds too much to her plate and wants to be the best at everything she does, which is a benefit and a hindrance to her at all times.
I definitely resonate with that, because I've hit the wall several times in the last few years where like we have this culture of more. And I'm like, oh, I have 15 minutes in between meetings. I should fill that. And so I saw a tweet yesterday from Seidel Bloom, who is a fascinating resource on productivity and just like being an excellent person in general who happens to be able to perform well. And he talked about the counterintuitiveness of productivity, and that those 15-minute blocks, like just sit there and do nothing and it's more productive. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't know how to do that.
I agree. Doing nothing is very hard.
Definitely. So I want to get into that, but I also want to talk about you as an athlete first. So we got connected. You reached out on behalf of Parity to learn more about, or to share what you had. So we're going to get into that. We're going to get into your experience on the U.S. Paralympic team and Nordic skiing, which I think is the hardest sport known to man. But let's roll it back all the way. When did you become an athlete?
I think I became an athlete, I don't know, I think the first organized sport I did was at the age of 3. And my parents definitely, like, having a child with a disability who was physically different, they wanted to always make sure that I was participating in sports like everyone else. And they never let me use missing my hand as any type of excuse. And so for specific sports growing up, like softball, basketball, things that traditionally would be done with 2 hands, we had to figure out ways to do them just as well. And I think I really credit my parents for having the motivation, because without them putting me in sports, like I wouldn't be doing what I get to do now.
What did it feel like at first?
What did what feel like?
doing sports. So you mentioned like you got into sports. Your parents were like, okay, we have to figure out how to adapt here. At what point did you realize that you weren't like everyone else? Or did you?
It's funny because we never used the word disability growing up. Like, I've only started using the word since joining the Paralympic movement, so just in the past few years. And while it's obvious to anyone that I am different by missing my hand, I think that sports was the place where I could feel similar to my peers, even though I looked different. And it took like a lot of experimentation and different attempts to figure out how can I be as good as someone who has both their hands. Like for softball, for example, I catch and throw with my right, so I have to take off my mitt. And I didn't want a coach or anyone to ever use the excuse of, oh, well, she's not getting playing time or she's riding the bench because she's can't do it as fast or isn't as strong. And I would just spend hours like practicing just taking the mitt on and off. And so it's like I always knew I was different, but I think in sports it allowed me to still excel despite my difference.
And so where did Nordic skiing come in? And why?
It came in so late. I had a very untraditional path to get to the Paralympics. I went to college to run cross country and track, and I had only started running my junior year of high school. So I was very new. I'd quit soccer, softball, and basketball, decided to try running, and had some good success and ended up getting recruited to go to the Division I level. Sidebar, my coach didn't even know I was missing my hand until I showed up for my official. And that's one thing that
track.
Cross country and track running. And that's one thing I like about like swimming and running and other sports that are racing sports is it didn't matter because like, he could see my times.
Right.
And that's how I got recruited based off of. So the fact that he didn't even know I was missing my hand, I think is actually kind of cool and funny that it was just I was able to display what I was able to do. I ended up quitting the team in college due to some personal matters and some team issues. And I was focused, my whole focus was I am going to be the first female GM of an NFL team. Like I loved sports. I wanted to be in sports, but I didn't see my path as an athlete. I mean, for most college runners, there's not really, you either go pro or you don't. And I was definitely not at the level to be able to do that. And I wanted to work in pro sports. I got a job in pro sports. I worked in pro sports for a few years, and it did not fill my cup like I hoped it would. And someone reached out to me about the Paralympics. I did not know much about them. I didn't really know I was eligible for the Paralympics. Like in my experience, I just didn't, again, associate myself with disability. And the little I knew about the Paralympics was more so, oh, it's for people with visual impairments, people who use wheelchairs. Like I didn't know there was a category that I fit into as an arm amputee. And so I started training for track and field, trained for track and field for about 6 months to try to make the Tokyo team. And somehow through the grapevine, I got pulled into the Nordic skiing world.
And so where did you grow up?
Boise, Idaho.
And so Nordic skiing is like a thing to do there. Right?
Not a ton. Like there is a place that you can Nordic ski, but compared to other communities now that I've seen, it's not.
Like Wisconsin and Minnesota.
Yeah, Minnesota. I mean, like high schools have teams there.
Well, you're born with skis on.
Yes. And so I first tried Nordic skiing 3 years ago now, and now I do it full time. And I'm definitely behind in the fact that you can't rush experience. And skiing, cross-country skiing is so technical. Like I felt like in running, for example, when I joined it in high school, I was able to kind of fake it until a certain point.
It's less of a skill and more of a practice.
Exactly. And yeah, even with like poorer form, I could still race well and do
aerobically
things
faster.
Exactly. But with Nordic skiing, it's so complicated because it's this combination of being extremely fit and having your aerobic base. But if you can't do it efficiently, you could be the fittest person in the world and not win the race.
So my experience with Nordic skiing is basically only above 9,000 feet. And I took a lesson. So I started by skate skiing. I played hockey growing up. So I was like pretty familiar with that motion. And I took a lesson, and like within 5 minutes, I was like, oh yeah, I get this. But then it's just like, oh yeah, I get this for like a minute. Yeah. And then it's like, wow, this is really freaking taxing.
It's hard.
I don't remember where I was going with that, but it's to say it's really, really hard. But a lot of the sports science research on endurance athletes is done on Nordic skiing. You probably know this because the capacity for work is so high, and it's done on a lot of. There's fascinating research on European athletes, and they go from skiing to sauna and skiing to sauna. But anyway, okay, so you get drawn to Nordic skiing for Tokyo.
For Beijing.
For Beijing,
So I was one of 4 Team USA athletes who qualified for the Summer and Winter Games. And with the delay due to COVID of the Tokyo Summer Games, the games were 6 months apart.
What was that like?
Hard. And people were like, oh, you run track and field, you ski, like seemingly complimentary maybe. It was not. I was running the 400 in Tokyo, and I'm not a sprinter. I faked it for 2 years, somehow managed to qualify for the games. And people always say, like, why would you do the 400? Well, I didn't really have a choice because in Paralympic track and field, It's the largest Paralympic sport at the games. And there's a lot of classifications. Is basically you compete against people with similar disabilities. And for my specific classification, the only running events at the games are the 100, 200, and 400. So it's like if I wanted to do a running event at the games, those were my options. And like in college and high school, 3,000, 5,000 meters. So long distance. And then all of a sudden I'm trying to compete for a 400. And knowing that then 6 months later, I'd be skiing up to 18 kilometers, the training that summer was messy. It was like...
So you were training for both at the same time?
Yeah. And so it was mushing two plans together that did not seem to go together very well.
But you did it.
Somehow. Maybe not well.
What was that experience like, right? Because it's like so hard to be consistent at one thing. And here you were doing two.
It was extremely challenging. And a lot of people like talk about post-games blues, like feeling totally down after the Olympics or Paralympics.
You're like, I got another one.
I thought that's how I'd feel, but like those few weeks after Tokyo, it was just like emptiness. And I was mad at myself because I should feel so lucky that I got to do another one 6 months later. But it was hard mentally then to transition to be like, okay, track is done. Now we're just skiing. And so it was challenging, not only physically, but mentally, I'd say as well.
How did you grapple with that?
Crying a lot.
I was reading Kara Goucher's book and learned of the shower cry. Of like, it's really efficient if the person you're living with is like also contributing to and you're in the water and you don't have to clean up anyway. So a lot of crying. What were the other, or was that just the main tactic?
The main tactic, yeah, was a lot of crying. I think like I had to take a little bit of time off, but not too much time. And obviously, basically kind of like use what everyone else did the summer prior of building their base. I had like to do that in
2 weeks.
October, until I got on snow. And so I tried to get back together with my ski team and put track behind me, which was tough because Tokyo for me was like the reason I gave up my professional career was to make the Tokyo. And it all came down to this weird 60-second 400 race that I don't even remember because I blacked out because I was so nervous, mixed with just like so many things. And it was hard then figuring out how to shift that focus to skiing. But I think with skiing, one thing it made me realize is like, yeah, I am an endurance athlete. Like I do enjoy this a lot more, even though I'm not good at skiing yet. And people always laugh when I say that because they're like, you're on the U.S. team. How can you not be good at skiing? And I'm like, well, in comparison to
the
competition,
1% of the 1%.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, got it.
But that's one thing that was cool about skiing was like in Beijing, I did 5 events. So I had like a lot more to look forward to. And if one didn't go well, it's like I had something else to reach for.
I've talked with a lot of people who have done cool things or things that they've aspired to do. And that part's interesting, but it's like the what's next. So Gwen Jorgensen and I had a conversation downstairs. And before we had this super professional setup. And I asked her what happened after she won the Olympic gold medal. She's like, I wasn't afraid of failure. I was afraid of success. Like you do this thing that you trained your whole damn life for. And then you're like 30 years old and you achieved it. Like, then what? And her answer was fascinating. So refer back to that episode for those listening. If you haven't tuned in yet, it was a good one. So it sounds like there was something similar going on there around Tokyo where that was like, you left your career for that and that was the pursuit. I am curious, you talked a little bit about it, but like the day after the race, was there a period of gratitude? Was it straight into the tears and the reset and the stuff a whole bunch of training into October?
Yeah, I'd say it was hard to feel gratitude in the moment. And I also, to a certain extent, felt kind of robbed of my experience because it was COVID. Like, I didn't get to stay and watch teammates compete because there was a rule. You had to leave a certain amount of time after your event. My event was the first day. So it's like I was back home tuning in at 6 a.m. like anyone else who was trying to watch the Paralympics. So it was hard to feel that gratitude. I think now, like reflecting back, coming up on 2 years, which is going to be crazy post Tokyo, I can, because that 60-second race, like if I hadn't been training for track and field, I wouldn't have gotten pulled into Nordic. I wouldn't have this career now. I wouldn't have this platform and be able to be an advocate for the community and for the Paralympic movement. So I feel gratitude now, but in the moment, it was very hard to feel that.
I can only imagine. So fast forward to today. What are we training for?
So I'm no longer training for track and field. I made that decision pretty soon after Beijing, after seeing how far back I was from my competition and knowing I want to be the best in that sport. It was unrealistic to do the flip-flop summer, winter, for a period of time, because I'm basically playing catch-up of all these Europeans who have been skiing. They skied to school as kids, and now I'm trying to figure it out at 26 years old. And it was a hard decision to come to say, oh, like no longer a summer athlete, just a winter athlete. And I hate feeling like I'm put into a bucket because I want to do all these things and be all these things and be great at everything. And so that was a hard decision. And so I almost like wanted to find the next thing. So I said, why don't I do triathlon for the Paris Games? And due to the advice of my coaches, they said, if you actually want to get good at this sport, you need to be giving us 4 years, like most Olympic and Paralympic athletes.
Or like 20.
Or like 20. So right now I'm training for Milan 2026 for the Winter Paralympics in cross-country skiing and biathlon. Just finished my season 2 days ago. And I'm very lucky in the sense that I live in a place that has a lot of outdoor activities in Bozeman, Montana. Last summer, I tried trail running for the first time, and I was pretty hooked. I was like, this is cross-country running for adults.
Yeah,
like,
right.
This is
play.
This is play. And I entered a few just races around Bozeman and enjoyed it. And I also enjoyed the fact that I could almost like go back to what it was like in college and growing up, where I compete against people who don't have disabilities and I can still kick their ass. And so I think this summer I am narrowing down, because I get overly excited and want to sign up for everything. I'm going to narrow down a few specific trail races that I would like to try to get podium contention for. But I will be training for skiing as well this summer. We only get the month of April off. Everyone assumes that because it's a winter sport that summers are off time, but like summer's huge for us. That's when we build our base. And so it's a lot of hours. So it's going to be upwards of 25 hours a week of training this summer. And
is that on roller skates?
Yeah, roller skis. We do roller skiing quite a bit. It's a lot of like dry land shooting. So getting some back to our basics for biathlon for shooting. We do run and bike and do other endurance activities, starting to build our strength plans back up, things like that. So I am excited to do the trail running and the trail racing. I just need to stay healthy. Last summer, I was rolling ankles left and right. And so I need to try to stay on top of that. But I really want to do well at trail, but I also really want to do well at Nordic skiing and biathlon. And so trying to figure out the balance of those two things.
Where does your drive come from?
I don't know. No, I think like I notice this a lot in the disability community. I think so often people were told no because they had a physical difference or they had an injury that led them to having a disability. And they're oftentimes told other people are telling them what they're capable of. And so I think that by growing up being physically different than my peers, I just always wanted to be better than them and prove that I could be. And so I just want to be the best at everything. So
what does success mean to you? I read a review of the podcast recently, and it was like, it's good-ish. And he asks like the same questions all the time. And
isn't that what you're supposed to do?
Well, that's the thing. I'm so fascinated by people who are self identified as like high performers or they're striving for excellence. And it's the whole reason that I have this podcast, because I was meeting a lot of people doing really cool things and I wanted to learn from them. And I'm a curious person. So I started asking questions and I was like, I'm sitting on gold. I must share this. And so the reason I ask similar questions is because there's a consistency in the answers that I find to be important in sharing. And as the years have gone on, the conversation has changed.
Okay.
And it's changed in a good way, I think, around like sustainability for the long run. Always be branding. and like helping people understand how elite athletes think about excellence. And so that's why I ask these questions. But so to get back to the question that I like to ask, what does success mean to you?
Success to me, I think, would be doing something a lot bigger than my sport. And that's why I love the Paralympic movement and the platform, and I'm trying to use it to do more in my communities outside of it. I mean, I would love to win medals for Team USA and win races and do all these cool things. But I really think what I'm learning now, a few years into my athletic career and trying to step up my advocacy work, is success would be leaving the thing that I'm doing better than I found it. So making sure the next generation of para athletes have more opportunities than me. That when I talk to race directors and trying to do more in the outdoor industry, that then there's more inclusion. So success would be, it's much bigger than sport. And I think when I started this all, I was like, well, success is obviously winning medals. But now I think it's shifted my focus into being a lot more like, hopefully by winning medals and doing this, I can have success by implementing real change.
If you've been enjoying this podcast and can spare 90 seconds of your time today, can you do me a favor? Can you pop over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review? It helps other people find and enjoy the podcast too. Thanks so much. Thanks again to Goucher for supporting this episode. I have more than a few different styles at this point, and I love them all. At $25 a pop, you can leave a pair in your car, your backpack, or really anywhere so that you'll never be without some shades. You can feel good about your purchase too, as 1% of Goucher's annual gross sales, that's not just profits, go directly to environmental nonprofits working towards making our world a better place. If you'd like to support me in the show, treat yourself to a pair or 2 or 3 of Gouchers and head over to Goucher.com and get free shipping with the code FTLR. Your face will thank you. This episode of For the Long Run podcast is sponsored by Puma. For 75 years, Puma has been pushing sports and culture forward with innovative design and development. We are honored to have Puma supporting this show and supporting the running community at large. My greatest compliment for running shoe is, I didn't think about it once. The purpose of having the right gear is to enable you to do anything you want out there. When I'm running in Puma's DV8 Nitro First Mile, all I'm thinking about is literally anything else. I think about the community, I think about why trying hard things is so rewarding, I think about how cute Alfie is, and I think about how much I love tacos, and I think about the big things like how I want to leave each place I inhabit better than I found it. You know what I'm not thinking about? What's on my feet. And that's the best thing about Puma running shoes. They're designed to help you get out there effortlessly so you don't have to worry about what's on your feet. Just need to worry about putting one foot in front of the other. Check out a pair for yourself at puma.com and use the code FORTHELONGRUN, all one word, for 20% off. Again, when you support Puma, you're supporting me and the rest of the podcast team. Thanks again to Puma for supporting us. Is it a good market to buy a home in? What about to sell a home? What even goes on in the housing market? How do you even keep track? Well, good news for you, you don't have to know all the answers if you're interested in buying or selling your home, because you can just work with the best realtor around, Lauren Daniels. Whether you're thinking of buying or selling your home, Lauren is your go-to. She treats every client with care and helps make what could be a very scary process, dare I say, fun. Lauren helps you get organized and stay on top of important deadlines and guides you towards the right home for you instead of pushing you towards something that doesn't feel right. Even if you're not ready yet or you're not in the Denver or Boulder area, we highly recommend following Lauren on Instagram because she's always sharing great information about the housing market. Give her a follow at lauren.in.colorado on Instagram. And if you're already ready to start the conversation, give her a shout at ldaniels@milehighmodern.com and let her know we sent you. That's ldaniels@milehighmodern.com. Yeah, it's cool when people use their physical skills to like manifest better outcomes for other people. And so we saw this with Shalane Flanagan, with Des, and the ability to help people do things bigger than themselves. And it's like Brad Stolberg called it the Shalane effect of like doing things in the process of helping other people improve actually enables you to do more. And so like I watch it, I see it a lot here in Boulder where like there are a lot of really fit athletes and there are a lot of really, really, really fit athletes. And the really, really, really fit athletes train with the really fit athletes and vice versa. And this just like dichotomy or I don't really know how to describe it, but like doing it for someone else or with someone else enables you to find that extra gear. Like this past weekend, definitely not on the same level, but I was in Boston and my girlfriend's longest long run was scheduled and she was going to do 20 and I was going to do 10 and things got really hard. And she was like, do you want to keep running? And I was like, okay, I feel pretty good. So like I ran 18 miles and I haven't run 18 miles since November. And it just like felt easy.
Yeah.
And had I gone out that morning with the intention of I'm going to run 18 miles, my mindset would have been totally different and it would have been way more challenging. And there may not have been as much joy or whatnot around it. And so it's really cool how you can like work your mind in order to get more out of yourself. And so like the $1 million question is like, well, how do you do that for yourself? Or how do you like put yourself in a position where you can be doing that all the time?
Yeah.
I don't have the answer to that question.
I don't know the answer either.
I don't know if anyone does, but it's worth pursuing. So the goal is growth. The goal is leaving the Paralympic movement in a better place than when you entered it. Talk to me about what it feels like to, I find the concept of representation to be fascinating. And like, I'm a straight white dude and I see myself absolutely everywhere.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of people on this podcast that say like, I saw someone that looked like me, so I wanted to do it. And so I feel a responsibility to put those people in a place to elevate their stories. And like I had a conversation with a guy named Raj Paul Panu. He lives in Denver, and he's an ultra marathoner who does his ultras on the roads.
Crazy.
And he's like, I never saw a brown guy on the start line. I wanted to be that guy for that boy that's watching me. Talk to me about do you feel a responsibility? Do you feel pressure? Do you feel like, people are watching you more than the next person? And how do you handle that?
I definitely feel a responsibility. I think that I lacked role models who looked like me growing up. And so I feel that what I am doing in general is very selfish. Like being an elite athlete is pretty selfish. Is it? To a certain extent, I think so. You miss out on a lot of things, a lot of events, life events of other people. It's always like, how can I get good at this sport?
Sure.
And so I do feel a responsibility to, in any amount of free time I have, how can I be doing more for the advocacy work? So for myself, like volunteering for adaptive sports organizations, camps, clinics, things like that. And I think too that while we all want individual success and we want brand partners and we need money to live and everything like that, I find it very special that if I am able to achieve that or end up on, a commercial or do these certain things, like, while yes, that's great success for myself, that could have a ripple effect. And now a kid without a hand somewhere might see that and say, oh, wow, like, look what she's doing. Can I do that too?
So isn't that not selfish by nature?
Yeah. But the sport feels selfish sometimes, So
I've had this conversation a million times, and I used to feel the same way. And then let's say you get injured, you can't run, and you can't do what brings you joy. I think I'm a shittier version of myself in that moment. And so
that's fair.
So like I can't show up the best version of myself when I can't do the sport that I love.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like I wouldn't call it the opposite of selfish.
Yeah.
It certainly like has selfish tendencies. But I'm the best employee. I'm the best coworker. I'm the best blah, blah, insert whatever here. So I don't think it's selfish. I think there are selfish tendencies, but I also can't imagine a life without like the sport. And to me, it's like a sandbox of let's play, let's make mistakes, let's learn, and then apply those lessons to life. So I'm in sales and I have big numbers that I have to go after. I don't really know how I'm going to hit them. I just like take bites out of the elephant. Yeah. And it's the same thing with training for a marathon or training for whatever. It's like, well, on day one, you can't do the job. Yeah. But at the end of it, you've amassed enough bricks that you've stacked and stacked and stacked, and you can do it. Probably the same thing with the first time you Nordic skied. And so like, I really love hammering home this analogy around like, for my job, that's incredibly quantifiable and binary of, well, is he doing a good job? Yes or no? With the ability to look at it in the like bite-sized approach is very similar. Like endurance athletes learn that over and over and over and over and over again. And to me, that's incredibly valuable.
No, for sure. And I think too, like I also have recently started in a sales job, and I almost do enjoy the metric side and having those numbers I'm trying to hit, because then I feel it relates to my sport very well. But with advocacy work, I almost like, that's when I'm always like, am I doing enough? Yeah. Because there isn't necessarily a quantifiable approach or way to view it. And so I just always am feeling like I should be doing more. And then I'm like, oh, well, there's not enough hours in the day. If we're trying to work, train, and be good people who are trying to, like I said before, make this a little bit better for the next generation. And so I try, but sometimes I don't feel like I'm succeeding at it.
So what is your relationship with balance or structure around like, right? Because it's something that I definitely struggle with. I don't think balance is something that most people should aspire to. We have seasons of life. We have periods of, the analogy I like is like a triangle, and it's not always an equilateral triangle. Sometimes it's we're going to go on the camera here. Sometimes that's not a triangle. Anyway, different lengths of the different sides, and you can't go too far in one direction because then the triangle collapses, which I've definitely felt. But it's not always the same looking triangle.
Balance, I don't feel that I have it. And like you just said, I feel like there's always one thing that's more dominant than the other going on. And I have a hard time sometimes like separating out different things and focuses and giving something attention. And my coach always tells me whenever I seem to like injure myself or get sick at a certain time, he said, maybe this was your slap in the face that you just needed to settle down and relax. And I was like, well, that seems like a shitty way to give me that message. And it's hard for me to do nothing. And that's one thing that I feel both in work, in advocacy, and in sport is, it's always, this desired, what could I be doing more? What could I be doing more to get there? And it's hard pill to swallow sometimes to be like, oh, you can't do more, or you shouldn't do more, or you need to give yourself a little time and a little space. And so I think that's something I'm always chasing. And like you said, the balance will probably never really exist, but chasing like, how can I make this all sustainable?
Yeah, I think that's the worthy goal. I saw Grayson Murphy tweet another Bozeman person.
Yeah.
She tweeted the other day, I feel like I'm the only pro runner that takes rest days.
Yeah.
And it's hard in this world where like you see people pushing all the time and you don't see the impact of all that pushing, right? You don't see people are proud to post when they're on top of the world.
Yeah.
And then you can't be on top of the world all the time. And so to me, I feel a responsibility to share the ups and the downs. It's like the Northern Arizona Elite approach of like, train fearlessly, race something, and share the whole thing. I just botch this every time I do it, but basically like share the whole journey.
Yeah. I've been trying to do that more too.
Yeah. And is it hard when things aren't going well to share the things? Like, it's not like a, I don't know, it doesn't get the likes. It's not the engaging content that people are on scrolling and looking for.
I think I'm getting better at it because I had a weird scenario with social media, and I also work in social media. Like some of my freelance work is in social because I have a marketing brain and I really like storytelling and stuff like that. But when I first started training and I was still working at my job and training for track, I felt like I was two people. Like I had my work self that showed up to work, you know, I posted like going out on the weekends, things like that. And then I had this other Instagram account that was focused on, well, this is my training. This is me trying to volunteer and get involved in the disability community in adaptive sports. And I felt like they were
two different people.
And it took a while for me to be like, why am I running two Instagram accounts for myself?
Hashtag branding.
Yeah. And I was like, I am just one person. And I think now that the sport has taken over my life more and all these other things matter a lot more to me, and I'm like not afraid to talk about them, it's become easier to be vulnerable, I feel like, on social. Because I also feel like each year I get older, the less I care what people think. And someone actually gave me a really nice compliment the other day. I was talking on the phone with someone who runs the social media for a big adaptive sports organization. And he said to me, I love your Instagram. I was like, wow, thanks. Like it's not very cohesive, like the colors right now. I used to care a lot about that. And he said, I think you do a good job educating people on like disability inclusion. You also post about your personal life and you post about your training. And I think it's a nice balance. And I'm like, oh, thanks, because I feel like it's very out of balance.
But it's a whole person.
Yeah. And I do so many different things. So it's like, I guess it should reflect. And sometimes I feel like almost like you just talked about the triangle analogy. Should I be posting more educational pieces? Should I be posting more about my life? Like, I don't think anyone knows I've been dating someone for a year and a half because he never gets posted. But yeah, I think it's just trying to figure out like, can I have a bigger impact but still be myself? Like, yeah, I can talk about, well, these resources or these educational pieces about disability that I feel like a lot of people don't know, and I feel a duty to be sharing to try to educate. But then also like, I had a beer on the weekend with my friends. Do I post that? I don't know. It's a learning experience.
So I have this conversation with a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of people ask me like, what is your advice on this? And I've worked for my entire career with social media as like a foundational platform to enable growth and sales and marketing and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, don't overthink it. You're a human. You're not a runner. You're a person who runs. You're a person who swims or does whatever it is. Like whatever makes you unique from a sports perspective, like that's one aspect of life. And so my experience with social used to be just like in a complete isolation with running. And like I don't have a huge platform. It's 10,000 people, but it's not like 100,000 or whatever. But people really like to follow along. And sometimes I'm like, what the hell's the point of all this? Like, why am I sharing that I ate this for dinner and like that my run, blah, 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 blah. But like people really like experiencing this kind of stuff and like following a journey and following a story. And I do make it a point to share the ups and the downs and the everything in between. But sometimes I'm just like, this is so dumb. Like, what's the point of this? And then I get a message from someone like, oh, I've been blah, 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 and I do this, and it's helped me with this. And so there's a Jewish idiom of like, save one life, save a world entire. And so to me, it's like, I care about that one person that it has an impact on their life. And I had this conversation with Joe Holder. I was like, man, you have like hundreds of thousands of followers. Isn't it cool that you can have an impact on that many people? He's like, I don't care.
Yeah.
One person. If I can help one person, it makes an impact. So back to you and your ability to help one person and one person, maybe 700 people. Talk to me about Parity and what Parity is all about, and how can people support you and Parity in that effort?
Yeah. So Parity is an organization that has one goal, and it's to make sure female athletes have monetary resources so they can continue their careers. When I was training for Tokyo, winter of 2021, before the games, I was a nobody. Like, I had never competed internationally. I started all this just around COVID times. I was going to trials and going to try to make my first team, but I couldn't find anyone give me $1, even a product or anything. And I was laid off from my job. It was just not a great time. And I just wanted, like, somehow to figure out, can I afford to do this? And Parity had resources for women athletes on branding, LinkedIn, different things. And I joined the platform. And then I got to learn more about it and eventually got brought on to work for the organization. And we just want to find resources for women so they can continue their careers. We have 800 women in the platform, and it's really cool, like, connecting. We have WNBA players, NWSL, 200 Olympians and Paralympians, like crazy cool women in our platform. And we are trying to find brand partners for them so that they can continue their careers. And we want to see, obviously there's a lot of attention being drawn on women's sports now, and we want to capitalize on that and make sure these women are able to get paid at the end of the day in the sports sponsorship space. And so I think, like, when I think about where I direct my time and attention, like, it's always been focused on women and disability. And it's kind of cool because I can bridge the gap with Parity, because we do have quite a few Paralympians. Like myself working for the organization, I can implement good change within our organization. Like last week, I did a company-wide presentation on some, like, disability basics, and it got really good feedback from everyone. And it's cool that, like, a marginalized group like women, we have all these subgroups within it as well. And so it's been really, really cool. And I just want to, continue to help women, because I know how hard it can be financially for athletes, and especially women athletes, when it comes to getting sports sponsorships. And so I just want to help as many of these women as I can.
Cool. So 2 questions. One, I know there are a lot of people that work for brands that are listening to this podcast. What is your...
Email me.
What would your ask be to someone who's like, wow, that sounds cool, I want to be involved?
I would say email Dani at eos.coach. I mean, for our brands, like, we also know, this has to be a good decision for a brand as well to be able to partner with us. And it's been really cool to see both the big and small brands that we've worked with. Like, sometimes this is their first kind of stab at working with athletes or influencers in the space, but there's so many different options of what we can do. And we're continuing to expand on different options we have to partner with our athletes. And I would just say, for any brand, like, your marketing dollar, like, you will get great return on it by partnering with women athletes. Like, women athletes specifically on social, like, their fan bases are very dedicated. And that's one thing I really like about women's sports, is when people are invested and care about it, like, they really care. People know their shit when it comes to women's sports. And it's been really cool to see brands be able to not only help our women athletes, but also have great partnerships in return.
So the second question is in line with that and building on that. So there's a lot. Where was I going with this? I had a great one. Okay, so I'm just gonna start talking because I forget where I was going. But
where I was going.
So it's 2023. Voting with your dollar is definitely a thing to be doing. So someone who's listening is like, wow, cool, I love women's sports, I want to support brands that are supporting women's sports. For someone who's listening, how should they be thinking about buying decisions, or where can they find the brands that you're working with, or whatnot? And the reason I ask that is, all of this stuff it's Parity, it's not charity, right? Like, it still has to be a sound business decision. So
it is
we
business.
want to see long-term returns on investment into these types of activities. And so that's predicated on like it working. As someone who's been on the brand side for 10 years, I definitely agree that categorically working with female athletes versus male athletes is different. And more impactful. It's a generalization, but it's like a generalization confirmed by 10 years of experience in the space. So very long-winded way to ask, like, if someone's listening and they want to support the brands that are supporting women, or I think you know where I'm going with this. How can someone do something different with their dollars?
Yeah, I think seeing the athletes that a brand partners with, like I've definitely either gained or lost respect for brands based off of some of the athletes that they're choosing to spend their dollar with. With Parity, all the brands we've worked with are on our website, and we're just, at the end of the day, we are still a business. Like, we are not a charity. We're not a 501c3. We are a for-profit business. And so we do, though, seek out partners who do like women's sports, who are fans of women's sports and see the value behind women's sports. And I see this too in personal brand partners. I think the brand athlete relationship is really cool. It can be really great, really bad. But when you find a good brand partner and you vibe with the people at that company, it leads to so much more than just dollars. It leads to friendships. It leads to impacts so much bigger. One thing for any personal brand partner I've had is I don't want to just take the dollar and wear the logo or post on social. Can I implement actual change within that organization? So with one of my partners, next week I'm having a call with someone I've never worked with on that side who's in HR to talk about, are they including disability in their DE&I efforts? And so I think for a consumer, a brand, finding people to work with that have that same alignment as you and are willing to listen. Some companies, might not have ever considered partnering with women athletes or considered sponsoring a para athlete. But as long as they're willing to listen and they see the value behind it, and I just kind of what we talked about before, how can we make these sports that we care about, and for me, it's obviously the outdoor industry, how can we make it have more women, more people of color, more queer athletes, more people with disabilities? How can we start showcasing these different types of people that aren't, no offense, the cis white straight male?
Yeah, agreed. Because they all have podcasts and platforms already, or we all. Yeah, I love that. Back to the choosing with your dollars. There are so many opportunities, and even what I get to do with this podcast, I have so many choices, and I specifically pick brands that will listen to me, and my network is interesting in that I like to make connections with people and with brands, and the ability to have an influence at the brand versus it just being a check that enables you to, eat food, it is meaningful. And it certainly helps. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to work with Puma and introduce Puma to athletes that they might not have considered, or do cool stuff in terms of their investment into the sport. And I love their logo too. It's a sick logo. Anyway, this has been a blast. For those who don't follow you on social, where can we find you on your corner of the internet?
The One-Arm Dan.
Amazing. On all platforms.
Yeah. It's to the point. There's no other One-Arm Dan out there.
Awesome. Dani, thank you so much for taking the time to chat, and we'll see you out there on the trail sometime, I hope.
Yes.
Cool.
Let's diversify the trail scene.
There we go. That's it for today's episode. Like many long runs, it's sad when it has to end. I hope you join in next time on For the Long Run, and in the meantime, happy trails. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean a lot to me if you shared it so that others can find it and enjoy it too. This podcast and the accompanying music has been produced by Brian Walters of Single Track Sound. For the Long Run's logo was created by Vanessa Wolf of Sterling Wolf. Show notes have been written by Ruby Wiles and is managed by Emily Holland. It takes a village.